Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure today to welcome you to our conference. It's an annual conference that we hold every year on a very specific subject. As a reminder, we are long-term investors, so we consider that it's our responsibility to brainstorm on the future of our industry, of our infrastructure, things that can impact positively and negatively our investments. So this year was chosen the circular infrastructure thematic, which was very, actually, I think, passionate debate, and we discovered that we had lots of speakers which have tons of things to share with you, so I trust this morning is going to be really passionating. We have organized this research this year in a, I think, innovative way. We used to do it more academically, and I think we discovered that maybe it was less lively than what we have organized this year. So this year was organized through different kind of workshops, podcasts, and then ultimately this conference, which is sharing with you the outcome of our research. We are publishing today our research with a conclusion, involvement of lots of actors from the market. But today is really the day not to miss, because if you are not into reading 80 pages, which I trust and you will enjoy yourself very much, but I'm sure that having this lively debate will make you sure to have all the insight, all the takeaway that are necessary. So in a nutshell, why did we choose circular economy? The reason is very simple. We all focus on the challenges of our times, climate change, how to address GHG emissions, and to decrease and to go for transiting into a more sustainable economy. And I think that circular economy has been overlooked for many years, and we've been focused on energy efficiency, on renewable energy, but circular economy concept is very much important. We are very much going to reach the boundaries of the resources of our planet. And if I take just global figures, the circular materials that are re-injected in our economy are only reaching 7.2%, if I'm not wrong, Martine, which is very little. So more than 90% is actually wasted every year. We've been working on a linear concept where we were taking materials, using them, and then wasting them. So the very idea of really considering that we can progress from a humanitarian perspective within the boundaries of our planet requires that we really turn the tide. And that is what we are going to brainstorm today. So we will start our conference with the chance of having Judith Podoknik, which is really the leader, the paramount leader on this very concept. He is a former European commissioner who was the first one who brought a pack of reforms on circular economy. So this is going to be super interesting speech that he will deliver to us, followed by a panel which is going to confront views from policymakers, from European Commission, from industrials, from academic experts, having in mind to confront the views of everybody, brainstorming on regulation, which is definitely required, but sometimes which is failing its objectives, and what are industrials working on. And on circular economy in infrastructure, what do we mean? Well, basically, there are infrastructures which are addressing circular economy solutions by actually procuring like waste management, wastewater treatments, which are obvious solutions, but it goes one step further. What can we do on the infrastructures that we are operating or designing, conceiving, to change completely the way we are designing those infrastructures, the way we are operating as a society? And these are circular economy concepts applied to infrastructure. That will be debated, and then we will have a chance to share an inspirational speech from Isabelle Autissier, the famous French sailor, navigator, writer, broadcaster, followed by an inspirational speech from Eline Bergman, who's the CEO of Krellnet and also the co-founder of the Circular Nordic Hotspot. And afterwards, we will have another panel, and this time it will be focusing on more the levers we can use to accelerate, because after concluding that, it is really of a paramount importance. What can we do to accelerate? And this will be debated between academic experts, industrials, but interestingly enough, we've been gathering people from big industry, from large groups and with people from startups. So having confronted views, but I mean, altogether, we agree innovation is key. So you will have this chance of gathering all these thoughts. And then afterwards, we will have the very good chance of being concluded as a conference with Emmanuel, who is going to provide a conclusion on probably the more infrastructure perspective on our market. And she is the current, she was a former minister, and she is currently chairman of the Energy Regulatory Commission. So that's, the room is yours, Janet.
Thank you, Gwenola. So, dear friends, good to be among you. I have a lot of slides, so I will go straight to the point. Yeah, innovation is, by the way, important, but the key is system change. But let me try to persuade you. So, resource perspective, the common roots of the triple crisis. What you have here on the slide, it's the biomass of life. On the bottom, you have humans, wild mammals, and so on. But if you compare it to the rest of biomass of life, this is the biomass of animals. If you compare it to the rest, you would see that it's pretty small part of everything. But that's not what I want to share with you. If you compare biomass of life with the anthropogenic biomass, so everything what was created by humans, it's already less. So the estimates are that 2040 there will be 3-to-1, these two columns. So that's human-made. And already today, the plastic kingdom is double size of the animal kingdom. So if we go now to the International Resource Panel, which I'm co-chairing, when we talk about natural resources, what we talk about? We talk about biomass, metals, fossil fuels, non-metallic minerals, and we call all that materials. So everything extracted from the earth are materials. And on the top of that, water and land. If we look to the last 50 years, the trends, then we can see that global material use has basically tripled. Per capita has almost doubled, which means that majority of that tripling can be aligned with the economic growth, but important is, of course, also human growth. And most interesting is this solid black line, which is material productivity. Material productivity, it's efficiency of the use of resources per unit of GDP. It's basically growing in all the countries, but on a global level, from the mid-2000s, it actually started to fall. How is that possible? It's possible because of a structural change. We are buying more now from countries which are less resource efficient. Before, it was, for example, produced in Europe. Now it's produced in China or India. And that is giving, per unit of GDP, that kind of effect. When we look to the extraction and processing effects on environmental impacts, we found out that 90% of global land-related biodiversity loss and water stress can be associated with that. Majority is green, which means biomass. 50% of global climate change impacts and 1/3 of air pollution health impacts. So our conclusion is pretty simple. If we want, so first of all, we have estimated what would happen if the things would continue, and basically our modeling is showing that use of materials would basically double again by 2060. So our conclusion is pretty simple. It's absolutely necessary that the growth of well-being and economic growth is decoupled from the growth of resource use, and both basically decoupled from the environmental impacts. So, which brings me to the circular economy. Circular economy is actually instrument for delivering that decoupling. But if you see circular economy in the right way, it's actually also part of bigger picture of economic, societal, and cultural transformation, which is needed. It's an economy which is aligned with European Green Deals and with Sustainable Development Goals. So There are many levers when we talk about circular economy. We know that from recovery strategy, reuse, repair, refurbish, remanufacture, repurpose, to reduce strategy in manufacture and use. But one part which I can bluntly say, because I was responsible for that, which was never really under attention, was refuse and rethink, so reduction strategy. How we would in the first place do that, which is overlooked and pretty crucial for the effectiveness. Which leads me to a very simple logic. We basically don't need cars, we need mobility, we don't need light bulbs, we need light, we don't need chairs, you need to sit, we don't need refrigerators, we need chilled and healthy food, we don't need CDs, we want to listen to the music, we don't need pesticides, we want healthy plants. So dematerialization, rethinking the ownership, efficiency to be complemented with the sufficiency is basically the direction where we have to think and also move. When we talked about those things, this was basically done by Club of Rome and Systemic. I'm in both, and now it's uptaken also in the new International Resource Panel report. So what is the essence you need to look at in the first place? Those provisioning systems, human needs, which are most resource intensive. And these are nutrition, then housing, mobility, and daily functional needs. But of course, there are also other systems which are a kind of supportive systems, not directly human needs, which are also extremely resource intensive. So you can use it directly from the nature. You can talk about energy, about materials, or innovation, digitalization, and all that is pretty much connected. Infrastructure is basically that. So you have captured in your report all those areas, which is great, by the way. But it's also showing that you are pretty much in the center of the solutions. Which leads me to the main blind spots with the climate change in focus. Why we are not moving like we should move and why we are not moving faster. First, lack of holistic system approach. Public leaders and many others basically lack the capacity of system change vision. So we are pretty much in silo logic, which is then hindering the right policies and investment decisions and leading to conflicting silo policy logic afterwards. For example, in the climate, we have pretty much this approach. So we look to the carbon emissions, how to actually contain them for whatever it will cost. But my point is, let's do it with a cost which will, on other areas and in other points, be as effectively integrated in the whole logic that it's possible. The second blind spot is lack of drivers and pressures perspective. So we lack the focus on systemic natural resource use and management and on the market signals. So to give you just one example, it's very much currently spoken about. It's this critical raw materials. By the way, if you are commissioner for environment and if you hear critical raw materials, you get allergy immediately. Because again, everybody is speaking how to get materials which we use, but nobody speaks about how to actually better use all the materials. So it's really important to understand that reaching that transformation, energy transformation itself will, on the supply side, reaching net zero by 2050 will require 6 times today critical material use by 2040. And electric vehicles on the demand side use close to 10 times the materials as conventional cars. So both on supply and demand side, you have a problem. And when we are trying to address that, we are addressing it through, we will need to open new mines, which will need to be managed more environmentally friendly. That's the first policy. Need it? Second, whenever the critical raw materials are contained in any of the products, we need to recycle them. That's the second policy. But the policy which we don't talk about is actually how to address the resource-intensive economic system that we would in the first place need less materials, less energy, and that the whole story would be reverted upside down from the policy approach which we are currently using. On the other hand, market signals are also very much confusing. So they basically incentivize, do not incentivize sustainable resource use, but quite the opposite. So sending policy signals which are basically saying, if I simplify, production capital is overvalued and over-rewarded, human capital is undervalued and under-rewarded, and natural capital it's not valued at all. If we think that from that we will get a kind of social, economic, environmental balance, wake up. Never. So we have a regulation which is sending us be responsible. We have market signals which are sending us don't be responsible, because that's, and even as consumers, we are getting really confusing signals. Act responsibly, but pay for the food which is harvested responsibly, double price. That will not work on the markets. Simple as that. Then the last thing is lack of demand side focus. So mainly we focus on the supply side. So cleaning the supply side, it's our logic. While demand side, who is actually overstepping planetary boundaries and consuming, is not part of, seriously, of any climate talks. So if I try to explain you on this, energy is definitely most important story of all the stories. But if you look, the fugitive emissions from energy production are a bit less than 6%. So it's important to look at energy use in buildings, in transport, in industry. So how to make the circle smaller? That's the point. And how to make the whole energy transition consistent with the decoupling story, which I was mentioning before, which is currently not. So it's time to stop ignoring the inherent wastefulness of our production and consumption systems. For example, it would be in vain to decarbonize, as important as it is, the production of steel, if we are still using steel for cars which are standing still and empty houses. So you always have to start from the other side and then go how, because you will find solutions easier and not drive us in some of quite problematic solutions, in particular in energy area. And it's really important also, if you want to get Global South on board, if you do not start talk about the demand side, who is surpassing planetary boundaries and consuming actually, we will never get them seriously on board. We will just talk about loss and damage at the end, and it will be more and more loss and damage. So efficiency policies should be complemented by sufficiency policies, and material and consumption footprints should be taken into account. To summarize, if we want to avoid extinction of elephants in nature, I think it's essential that we first extinct elephants in our rooms. So, which leads me just to 4 slides before conclusion about International Resource Panel, where we are going. So we will introduce provisioning systems, so shift away from prevailing resource wasteful economic logic, go via the well-being, and basically this allows you much more flexible solutions than actually looking narrowly. And you will find such kind of slides in our report, which are basically, on the left-hand side, you see the provisioning systems, human needs, contribution to the climate. On the right-hand side, you see contribution to biodiversity loss. And you can see that, like it or not, food system is contributing most. And it will definitely have to come under our attention. And second, we will complement supply with demand side, connecting resource use to equity and justice-related implications. So just one thing which is important to mention, it's not only about high-income countries, low-income countries, it is, of course, but it's about high wealthy consumers everywhere. And all are responsible. So if you look at, this is just a teaser, if you look to that, on the top is climate change story, contributions, high-income countries versus low-income countries, and on the bottom it's biodiversity. I don't have time to go explaining for what they are actually meant, to explain what is behind, but this is something which is coming and it will be really impactful. Finally, about your report. I have read the conclusions and frankly, I was quite impressed. Understanding of the essential facts is clear. Call for increased ambition pace of public policies must accelerate and embrace the whole system approach beyond recycling regulations. These are all quotes from your report. Broad acceptance of the importance of human needs logic, so waste management and water treatment systems are two essential infrastructure for circularity and circular life cycle logic needed for operators, transport, telecom, energy, housing. Bold and visionary solutions going beyond traditional circular approaches, which is again good, and recognition of the cities as the agents of change. I think that's also very important. Why? Cities have extremely large level of autonomy. So if you have a good mayor, without having international agreements and without European Commission sending you somewhere, you can still do the job. So, and on the other hand, problems are concentrated in the cities, which means that also solutions are concentrated there. Which leads me to the conclusions. What are some basic shifts which are needed? Already, the Club of Rome told us that was 1972. By the way, 1972 was 3.8 billion population. We are now over 8 in 50 years. And at that time, they were already saying that unlimited material growth and consumption on a finite planet would eventually lead to collapse and decline. And they have two scenarios, or better to say, we have two scenarios in Earth for All. One is too little too late, and it's too little too late to talk about it. And the other is the giant leap. And in the giant leap, which is basically the fastest economic transformation ever, there are two things which I would like you to remember. One is we will first hit social tipping points before we will hit environmental. Nothing which is acceptable, it's simply not acceptable. And second, even if we do everything and fast, we will hit 2 degrees Celsius. So we are on that trajectory, pretty much. Which leads me now to these conclusions. We need to move from humans which are in function of economic success, which is predominant, and development to an economy in function of delivering human needs, setting the order right. Second, from an economy considering humans as external and superior to nature, to an economy acknowledging that we are embedded with nature. Destroying nature is destroying ourselves. Third, from extraction-based production and creation to creation-based production, we should stop stimulating extraction-based economic success and reward responsible, innovative, creative ways of meeting human needs. And last, we should move from egoistic short-term-based interest governance structures and logic to cooperation and sharing sovereignty. Cooperation, it's a must in a planet where we are, as a first generation, living in a socio-ecological space of planetary scope. I can explain you that in detail, but without cooperation, we are doomed. So, is this really so challenging for the business sector as we are hearing on a daily basis? These are the results of this year's top 10 risks based on the survey done among the business leaders. In 10 years perspective, what are the major challenges which they see? Number 1, failure to mitigate climate change. Number 2, failure to climate change adoption. Number 3, natural disasters and extreme weather events. Number 4, biodiversity loss and ecosystem collapse. Number 6, natural resources crisis. So it's pretty obvious that this is the name of the game which business understands very well. And today in policy, taking painkillers just that we would heal the chronic diseases will simply not work. Which leads me to the final message, which is access to natural resources and use of natural resources was in human history always the core defining factor of well-being of a nation. That's why you have seen the history of colonialization of nature, so a lot of the things happening in history which were far from fair. But unfortunately, this is also the reason many times for conflicts, wars. Just remember access to land, water, precious metals, minerals, oil, and so on. So the whole history of this colonization of nature is also central to fairness and equity. And when we are talking about our environmental transformation story, we basically don't talk about only environmental issues. We pretty much talk about the issues which are connected to economic, equity, security imperative, strengthening our overall resilience. So currently, relationship of humans with the rest of nature is simply not stable. And it will be resolved in two ways, either with wisdom and cooperation or in a hard way, because it will be resolved. So the future will be green, or there will be no future. That's the last slide. It's actually the quote from my former country. We have all read Alan Ford. It was a comics in former Yugoslavia, where in one quote, it's nicely explaining where we are currently standing in economic system and where it's actually leading us. It's basically saying it's not the problem to drive without the brakes. The problem is to stop. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Janis. That was a really remarkable tour de force of the challenges that the world is facing. And I think you're an optimist at the end, but you left us a pretty bleak sense of the current need to act fast. I'm Matthew Bishop. I'm going to be moderating the next part of our conversation. I'd like to call the first panel up to the stage now. I have Aurel Ciobanu Dordea, who's the Director in charge of Circular Economy in the European Commission's Director General for Environment, Paul Eakins of University College London, Sergio Osle, the COO of Telefonica Spain, Pierre Arduin, CEO of Equans France, and Lucie Muniez, Director for Sustainable Development at PAPREC. So welcome, everyone. So we are at this remarkable moment of choice in human history where we decide between those two visions of how we get to a future that will be green, as Janis says, but are we going to do it in a wise way or not? I do think, as I've looked over the last 10 or 15 years, that one of the big ideas to have come onto the global agenda is the circular economy. And as this report from Vauban makes clear, circular infrastructure is going to be essential if we're going to have a circular economy. The infrastructure of the economy produces probably around 70% upwards, maybe near 80% of global emissions, for example. And as we've seen also, it's a vast consumer of all sorts of minerals and materials in ways that have had a massive negative effect on biodiversity, which in itself is being forecast to get dramatically larger in terms of its negative footprint over the next 10 or 20 years, unless we do move decisively towards a circular economy. So I wanted to ask each of our panelists, first of all, for a sort of very high-level 1-minute answer on what their vision is for a global economy that is circular, and why that is so important in terms of the role it can play in our broader sustainability effort. And where do you see the biggest opportunities for building circular infrastructure? So I'm going to start with our academic expert, Dr. Paul Eakins. 1 minute on those topics, please. You're on, yeah.
I'm on. Good morning, everyone. A great pleasure to be here. Well, after Janis's talk, I'm not sure that, there's so much more to say about a high-level circular economy, but perhaps unpack some of the characteristics of it. So it's going to deliver more service per unit of material. So that's the resource decoupling story. How does it do that? Well, materials and products stay in the economy for longer. When parts go wrong, they can be repaired or replaced. And I've been enormously excited to see these laws of repair starting to come in at the European level. When parts are replaced, they can be remanufactured for large goods. And at the end of life, materials can be easily recovered and recycled. And for that to happen, we need 3 or 4 system changes. We need a laser-like focus on design, because if you don't design it to do those things, it won't do those things. We need new structures of responsibility and ownership, reinforced by legislation that is enforced. And in my country particularly, we have lots of legislation that isn't enforced, with the result that things are not as efficient as they might be. And that leads into the overwhelming importance, as you'd expect from an economist, of incentives. If people don't have economic incentives to do the right thing, then the right thing, by and large, will not happen. And at the moment, that's very much the case. Thanks.
And just very quickly, what how do you think it's going so far? This shift to the circular economy.
Nothing like quickly enough. I'm not a young man, as you can see, and my first book was published in 1986. It was called The Living Economy, and it touched on many, many of these issues. And if you go back and read that, as old people sometimes do, I'm appalled at how current many of those ideas still are. I would have hoped and expected that nearly 50 years on, we would have been well beyond what was written in 1986. But actually, that's not the case.
Janis was European Commissioner on the Environment, introduced the term circular economy at the European level. And I wanted to turn now to get the regulatory perspective from Aurel Chibanu-Dordier. What's your vision for the circular economy? How does circular infrastructure fit in? Where are we in the process now?
Yeah, good morning, and thanks for having me. I think, and we believe in the European Commission, that circularity is not the recipe for everything, but it is an important and indispensable component for competitiveness, for successfully fighting against climate change, and for enhancing the strategic autonomy of the European Union. And I think we are living in times where the importance of strategic autonomy doesn't need to be demonstrated. We have seen over the past several years the weaponization of supply chains by important geopolitical actors. We see also the need for enhancing the competitiveness and strengthening the competitiveness of our geopolitical continent. And I think the leaders of the European Union, our heads of states and governments, this spring have adopted conclusions about how to maintain the competitiveness of Europe beyond 2030. They have identified 7 priorities. Circularity is one of the 7 priorities. So it has strategic value, and you need to be aware of how circularity contributes to the fight against climate change when you have 50% of the extraction of resources represented by the built environment. So circularity is important in order to reduce this consumption of extracted resources, and when you have 40% of carbon emissions coming from the built environment. Where the opportunities lie, I think we have a lot to do indeed, but we need to take a more systemic approach towards a life cycle approach towards the built environment and towards infrastructure, and think more comprehensively from the beginning of any project to the very end. What happens, how do we design projects in order to make better use of secondary raw materials, how we recycle at the end, how we design infrastructure for multiple purposes, if it's possible.
Great. So business is obviously at the front line of this battle to transform the economy into a circular economy, and business, I think, is having to grapple with circular economy both, what are the regulations coming down the line, what are the consumers going to be demanding, but also seeing circular economy as an opportunity to maybe do things better and more profitably. And I wanted to ask each of our business representatives quickly for their vision of circularity and its importance within the sustainability effort, and what they're doing, what their number one priority is in each case. So I'll start with Lucy.
Yes, thank you very much. I would like to thank Granola and all our team to give me the opportunity to be with you today. So thank you very much for this study too. And I would like, first of all, to deliver an optimistic message, because as I'm working as a sustainable director, the sustainable development director of PAPRA Group, with the French leader in the recycling industry. And we are an industrial group present in the whole waste management chain. And we strongly believe that we are part of the solution. Because we think that circular economy is the cornerstone of the transition. We have to operate together towards carbon neutrality, but also to tackle climate change and preserving biodiversity. And with all our waste management infrastructure, we propel the transition to more sustainable economic models through our 4-stage processes of collecting, sorting, recycling, and recovering waste. Because we are creating new raw materials from recycling. We are producing biofertilizers and biogas from organic waste. And we are also producing low carbon energy from recovery. And we see waste, it's not a provocation, but we see waste as an opportunity. We see waste recycling and recovery as a really opportunity to transform waste in new resources. And as I hear, we are very happy to hear that European Commission and all member states now consider that waste is a key issue for the European sovereignty. Thank you.
Thanks, Sergio.
Hello. Well, thank you also for inviting me. And well, for us, it's kind of a no-brainer. Actually, we operate in an industry, the telco industry, that as you all know, is very fast-paced. It's growing a lot in demand. For us, even if we didn't care about the future of the world, which is obviously not the case, we need to employ circular economy to being able to be competitive. Otherwise, it will be impossible. When you look at how much the traffic data has increased in our network over the last 8 years, it's more than 5 times bigger than it used to be just 8 years ago. And the only way to provide that kind of service in a highly competitive environment like ours is by reducing, utilizing all across our value chain and our operating model. And one of the other reasons why circular economy is so key for us is through the services that we provide to our customers. As it was mentioned also in the initial speech, digitalization is critical to ensure that some of the processes in the industrial age are less resource intensive. And we as telco providers, we are at the center of that digitalization. So it's something that we really think a lot about, even if we don't call it circular economy, as Paul and myself we were discussing before, because it's critical for our survival.
Thank you. And then Pierre.
Yes, good morning, everyone. So I'm the CEO of Equans. I don't know if all of you know Equans. We are a global solution provider in services and energy, known in France around brands as Ineo, Axima, or Bouygues Energy Service. So our value proposition, our reason of life is to provide solutions for customers to help them moving toward a low-carbon world, finding solutions to help them consuming less, greener, and flexible. So by definition, by essence, circular is one of the pillars of our value proposition. Not the only one, but one of the pillars of this approach, of course. And when we think about circular, as we are industrial, and our vision is to make it pragmatic, to make it real. So we are focusing on 3 axes in our solutions. The first is, of course, reuse. Reuse of material, reuse of solutions already existing. The second, which is quite important, is reuse of energy. You're talking about heat, but reuse of energy in a circular way is a wide source of opportunity. And the third one, on which we're also pragmatically working, is reuse of infrastructure. I'm talking about train, I'm talking about cities, lines, overheads. Lots of infrastructures could be used on another way. So we are very positive because we do think today things are moving. We are now facing customers which are not only coming for, I would say, economic solutions, but for sustainable solutions. And so I think in front of us we have 2 big challenges. The first is, of course, technical. We have to find solutions. We are there to provide solutions, and technology will help. But the second will be to leverage collaboration between people who own things and people who will need things. So between people who have and people who need, and make bridge between these 2 wide. So we have in front of us a double paradigm to solve. Technical, of course, but I'm quite confident, and much more collaborative, on which we're working all together.
Great. So in the report that was published today, circular infrastructure is described in 2 different ways. One is infrastructure for circularity. So that is, what is the role that the overall system of infrastructure plays in either enabling or holding back our transition to a truly circular economy? And the other way that circular infrastructure is described is about circularity of infrastructure itself. Like, is the infrastructure built in a way that is circular as opposed to linear? And I think a lot of infrastructure traditionally has been built in a very linear way. Materials are taken out of the ground, they're built into things, and then when the life of the infrastructure finishes, they're just destroyed and thrown away. And now, how does infrastructure move to be inherently circular itself? I wanted to ask, first of all, Paul, to what extent is that distinction important, and why?
Well, I think it's obviously really important, or you wouldn't have asked the question. And one of the reasons is that infrastructure is inherently long-lived, and it's when one is designing infrastructure, one knows it's going to be around for decades, almost by definition. And that means that you need to take account of quite specific aspects. You need to think about the end of life. So that's decades away. I've been much inspired. I've been working. I'm sorry, I'm being gestured at from the floor.
Use a different mic, maybe.
Use a different mic. Okay. Thanks very much. That sounds better. So I've been much inspired. I'm working on a report for the International Resource Panel on critical minerals. And as Janesh said, we're going to need a lot more mines. That's a huge challenge, because mining is not something that anyone likes anywhere near them in the way that it's done at the moment. But one thing that has inspired me is that when you put in plans for a new mine, and it might last 40 years, you have to have a clear plan for the end of life and the land remediation at the end. It hasn't always been like that, but in any country that is remotely well regulated, it is now like that. And you have to put money aside at the beginning and during the operation of the mine, so that at the end of life of the mine, you are able to remediate the land and return it to its owners in a way that it is useful and productive. And that should become the model for absolutely all material production. But unfortunately, it still very much isn't. So the second point I would make is, the next question I would ask of any infrastructure provider is, can nature help? Sometimes nature can't help. But when we look at urban drainage, for example, any of you who've been involved in urban drainage will know that nature can help an enormous amount. And sustainable urban drainage systems are pretty commonplace now, not as much as they should be. Similarly, water management Can nature help? The answer is yes. Nature can help enormously, and nature can reduce the cost of engineered solutions enormously. Number three, I'm afraid we have to use life cycle assessment. Anything that's long-lived is going to live for a long time. It will require maintenance and all these other things. We need to know what are the inputs that will go into that from a material and environmental point of view. And on the basis of those three characteristics, we then can think about our business model. And I was very interested in what you were saying about Equans, that part of your value proposition is actually to do with the circular economy. I would very much hope that the European Commission over the next few years will encourage European member states to put in place the sorts of legislation and regulation that strengthens that value proposition. Because without that sort of intervention, I think it's very often quite hard to make the business case.
And just back to the distinction between these two definitions of circular infrastructure. I mean, does it, what should be the priority? Getting infrastructure itself to be circular, or really figuring out how it interacts with the overall transition to circularity? And are they different strategies in any sense?
I think they are different. In the actual construction of the infrastructure, in other words, not infrastructure for circular infrastructure, the actual construction of it, you're going to want to consider the materials used and all the factors that will go into that. But I think infrastructure for circularity, especially in the mobility sense, mobility is driven entirely by infrastructure. In the 1960s, we had visions of car-dominated cities, and we're still trying to live with a lot of that, and it's awful. And we're gradually moving away to a quite different vision, where cities are for people, for walking, for cycling, and for public transport, and cars are both irrelevant and a social nuisance. And that is gradually getting established. Huge political pushback, not least in my own country, and we've seen that very recently. But that seems to be the direction of travel. And the one thing I know is that cities created on that basis will be much, much healthier, more pleasant places to live. They will do better economically. They will have more tourists. They will have more business and more vital activity.
So Lucy, water treatment and waste management are going to be two of the key pillars of any shift to a circular economy. What are you seeing in terms of PAPREC's role as you look at the current sort of upsurge in water use as a sort of major risk factor in society? And also, I mean, I think we're expecting a very large increase in solid waste generation as well over the next 30 years. What are the top priorities for you as a company?
I would say that our group, the birthday of the group next year, we will be 30 years old. We are a committed group for a greener planet. And our purpose is offering the best solutions to all our partners, customers, and public partners, industrial partners, and so on, to develop circularity of resources. This is the key issue for us. And as Dr. Paul can say, at the upstream level, our responsibility is to support all economic sectors by contributing to eco-design of projects and infrastructure. It is the key issue for all of us, I think, here, because the priority is to think about the end of life of the product and of the infrastructure when you design it. It's to think about the new resources it will become and how it will be recycled. And that is the first point I put ahead. The second point, of course, is the commitments we take at the level of our group and for ourselves. First, it's developing innovative solution. Innovation is a quite great issue in our sector to increase the recycling rate of waste and waste recovery, and developing a solution, the best solution for supplying low carbon or raw materials and energy. The second commitment is investing continuously in our infrastructure, because we are, as I said, former a part of the solution. We invest in with our shareholder in production facilities, in cutting edge technologies. So we need capex. We need to invest to develop this best solution. And the third point, and I was quite happy to hear Pierre Ardouin put it ahead, is developing industrial cooperation. It's, I think, I'm strongly convinced that it's the best leverage opportunity we have to develop for a circular infrastructure and circular solutions. I will take the example a bit later.
So Sergio, you talked about how circularity is really core to your strategy now. Just give us 2 or 3 examples of where you've made the most progress, where you're finding progress hardest, and what your biggest challenge is.
Yeah, I think we actually, I think at Telefonica, I mean, probably you have to start with the overall objectives that we have, and we take them very, very seriously. So we have an objective to become zero net as a group. You may know that we operate in several countries across Europe and Latin America, and our net zero objective is to be net zero by 2040, and in some more advanced countries, like the case of Spain, we take that objective to actually in a couple of years, 2025, we're going to be net zero. And those are objectives that are not just wishful thinking. They are hard-coded into what's most important for most managers, which is our bonus. A very significant part of our bonus has to do with every year with the objectives that have to do with sustainability, and that's one way to talk the talk. And how do we do that in a very pragmatic way, right? So we act upon several partners or stakeholders. First, I would say ourselves. We deploy a lot of infrastructure, we deploy a lot of network. The way that we do that is we try to make it as reusable as possible. And for instance, if you look at the mobile equipment that we use now as we transition into 5G, which by the way is way more efficient than 4G, we have a commitment to make 100% of the network equipment that we use let's say reusable by 2025, so in 2 years' time. And it's not a crazy commitment. I think in Spain we're already at 97% of retailization of our mobile network equipment. When you look at the fixed infrastructure, we're in the process in Spain of switching off the copper network and moving into a fiber network that will be completed by next year, and it's way more efficient. It's a network that's going to last for at least another 100 years because it's completely future-proof. When you look at the kind of equipment that we provide to our customers so that they can use our communication services, we do a lot of reutilization of that equipment as well. As of today, over 90% of all the equipment that we install in the homes of the customers is refurbished. A lot of people are not aware of that, but if you get the service from us in Spain, the router and the set-top box is going to be a refurbished equipment. It's not new at all. And the same thing happens with mobile equipment as well. We're pushing for a refurbishment program. So there's a bunch of things that we do. We also have very strong commitments with our suppliers. By 2025 as well, we have a commitment to reach 100% of our supply chain committed to a certain criteria around the circular economy. And so that's how we try to make things work. Another crucial aspect of us is we as an industry, we employ a lot of energy. We are certainly in most countries one of the largest consumers of energy just to operate our business. And we need to, that's hard, especially in this environment. But again, we have a very strong economic incentive to be as energy efficiency as possible. And one of the things that we are doing, for instance, is leveraging a lot of renewable energies. In Spain, Telefónica Spain, for instance, we already use 100% of renewable energy when it comes to our own services. And those are the kind of things that we try to do to be more efficient.
Thanks. Pierre, what about you? What's the role of service providers like Equans, and what have you achieved most progress on, and what are you finding hardest? And
I would say by definition, we are there to find solutions for our customers. So, as said Lucy, from the beginning, we need to integrate circular into the design. And BIM solutions could be a solution to integrate that into the design and to make carbon simulations from the beginning. So we offer this kind of solutions. Unfortunately, we have to also change what does exist. And so design from the beginning is not the only solution, but the future, it's a solution. Then, as I said at the beginning, we are trying to offer a solution greener, consuming less, and flexible. So if we start by reusing things, we are proposing to customers the reuse of lots of material, cable, furnitures in the buildings. And to do that, to enable that, we need connection systems between teams and customers. So we have a platform, logistic platform, to store solutions to be reused, and we have developed systems to make a collaboration between our teams to find the solution all over the territory, because it's good to reuse, but we need to know where is the solution to be reused. So that's, I would say, the easy solution, reusing as soon as you have logistic and communication system to transfer immediate information. At the second level, we talk about energy reutilization. Here, basically, in the industry, lots of heat is today shipped to birds. And so, basically, we capture heat, we store heat, and we reuse it. Is it inside the industry or outside the industry? It could be from a data center to a green farm, or it could be to a chimney, to a water pressure solution. So here, lots of solutions does exist, and we systematically provide solutions to try to capture heat, to capture energy, and to reuse it. Innovative solution does exist today. I don't know if you hear about aquifer thermal energy storage, for example. We capture heat during summer. We put it in the earth, and then during winter we take the heat to put it in the building, and in exchange we put cold in the ground. So this is a earth battery, totally recycling energy, putting heat when needed and capturing heat when needed. This solution does exist a lot, and it's a way to, let's say, recycle heat and cold according to season with a total neutral impact on the earth. So energy is a wide area in which we will be able to reuse, store, re-inject. Northern countries are much more in advance than France, and they all are also able to exchange energy at an area, at a city level, which is still not the case in France. So we have to move forward in terms of regulation. And then, innovative solution for infrastructure. Let's talk about transportation, for example. Transportation, we are working on e-highways. E-highways is using highways to decarbonize truck transportation. So instead of having trucks moved by diesel, we move them by electricity, putting catenary system over over roads. Roads exist, trucks exist. We transform them and we decarbonize this infrastructure. This is coming from northern country and now tested in France, and this is a very promising solutions, using infrastructure and another way contributing to decarbonization. I'm talking about e-highways, I'm talking about electrification of train. You know, today in Europe, less than half of the train are fueled by renewable energy. Most of them are still fueled by fossil energy. So we have lots of innovation to do that. So on infrastructure, I'm talking, last point, on cities. Our speakers, Jan, said that mayor can do a lot of things where they are visionary. And today we see in some cities partnership between industrial and the mayor to reuse the energy and the usage inside a city, combining data and infrastructure to share and optimize things. That's also something which is very promising.
Great. So, Aurel, you've heard some very upbeat comments from the business community. Perhaps you don't always hear such positivity towards this agenda from the business world. And I think it's generally recognised that government has got to play a big role in this transition, whether it be through regulation or tax and subsidy policy or its own procurement policies. Give us the big picture on, where you sit. Where is government getting this right? Where has it got to get to, and which levels of government? Is it commission level? Is it national level, local level? Is it global?
I think it cannot be just the Commission level or the European Union level or only the national level or only the local level. We need to act jointly, and public authorities alone will not be successful if we don't work together with the economic operators and the industrial associations, and also with the society at large. We need the consumers, the citizens, to understand the choices which are to be made and why certain shifts in paradigm are necessary, but not only why are they necessary, but they do not entail a significant sacrifice from the majority of the consumers. This is very important in order to support the acceptability of change, to make change feasible. So I'm not sure.
But you really think we can get there without the demand side changing significantly?
Yeah, we need to change the demand side significantly. So regulation will be important. Providing incentives will also be important. And let me remind here, for instance, because we are speaking in front of a room full of investors, that recently the European Union has adopted taxonomy rules about circularity in the area of infrastructure. So this is putting a green tag on those investments.
And this should stop greenwashing.
Sorry?
This should prevent greenwashing.
Yeah, this should prevent greenwashing and should show to those investors who are climate and environmentally minded where they can put their money in order to reach their objectives and to improve their performance and to respond to their consumers and investors. This will be important. I think green public procurement has a powerful driving force, and we will need to. We are coming towards the close of the political cycle at European level. In June next year, we will have elections for the new European Parliament, and in November next year we will have another college of the European Commission, and a new 5 years political cycle will start. We need to consider how we can leverage, for instance, green public procurement much more than we have done so far. We have done very little in this, and the public spending is very important as well. Private spending is important. Taxonomy plays a role. For public spending, green public procurement will play a role. And probably we need to think, but I'm not able to, I think it would be premature to comment on substantive changes, but we need to think also about other regulatory changes, substantive changes that might be necessary. But I would like to mention also an important thing. We have operated over the past 4 years very important changes at European Union level. Member states have acted as well. And the Green Deal was a commitment not just for the European level. A lot of member states have embraced it. We need to make the new rules adopted work as well. So implementation, even if it sounds a little bit boring, will be important, because reality, in particular in this area, does not change by just passing laws in our official journals. We need to put these rules into operation and strengthen the functioning of the markets and improve the attractiveness of circularity, the attractiveness from an economic angle, increase the profitability. For the moment, it is cheaper to use raw resources. We need to reverse the situation and to make it more interesting and more competitive to become circular.
And is there a particular thing we should be looking out for that you're going to be doing to try and make that happen?
Well, I don't want to comment because it would be premature. I think an important political decision will have to be made by the European Commission probably at the end of next year. But yeah, there are many things to think about. And as I mentioned, I think green public procurement is something. For the moment, we have acted only on a voluntary basis. We need to think about mandatory interventions.
So, Paul, I mean, do you feel as you look at, well, let's start at the European level, but more broadly, government embrace of this circularity and agenda, particularly towards infrastructure, are we getting it right? Is it too much about recycling? Should it be about other things like redesign? Or where would you like to see the next wave of action?
Well, it's certainly going in the right direction. So we've had two circular economy packages. The first one introduced by Janes, 2014, I guess, Janes, which the then new commission immediately after that decided it was going to scrap, and it was because of protests of people in this room and people like that, where they didn't scrap it. They said they would make it more ambitious. Well, they didn't, but we got a second circular economy package, and now it'll be very interesting to see how that develops once that was then taken on, obviously, by the next commission, and very interesting to see how it's. I think it's going in the right direction. What our friend here said on my left, music to my ears, that the incentives aren't right. There are still far too many good solutions, to quote a friend from Equans, far too many good solutions that don't yet make economic sense. And if they don't make economic sense, you can't do it. I've been amazed at just what entrepreneurs in this field can do, and there are several in this room. They've found opportunities of ways of making things economic, which me looking from the outside, I'd have said, nah, that's not going to fly. That's not going to work. But they've made it work. But what they have not yet managed to do, with some exceptions like Sergio, is really go to scale so that this becomes the mainstream way of organizing the economy. And so if I go back again to the late 1980s, we were talking in these terms. There were lots of little small niche outfits with very hard-working entrepreneurial people who just about made a living. We now need to scale up. This has to become the mainstream way of doing things. Either you do things like this, or you go bust. And that's not yet the situation. So that's the challenge, from my perspective, for the new Commission.
And particularly, just one other question. I mean, obviously, we're dealing with an industry that, certainly in Europe, is fairly mature, that there's a lot of legacy infrastructure in place. How can regulators, actually get that existing infrastructure to be retrofitted or whatever?
Well, that's a huge task. We struggle in the UK, and I guess in other countries too, even to retrofit our most basic buildings. I mean, our buildings are a disgrace. We've been talking about that for at least 40 years. And it's not cheap, and householders don't want to do it because it's a hassle. And so far, the policy approach that will make that happen has not yet been compelling enough to make it happen. And it has to be a systemic solution. It has to take finance, it has to take skills, it has to take a real perception of what it takes to refurbish a building, and it has to take account of all the little eccentricities in people's everyday lives that will make them really want to do this stuff. We've seen an acceleration thanks to the huge energy price rises that we had over the last couple of years. The economist in me says, well, I kind of always thought that would happen if we got a decent energy price. But of course, it's been a huge cost. If government had done that through carbon taxes and through supporting poorer people, we'd have been in a much better place fiscally and financially, and we'd be paying much less money on our gas to the oil and gas producers.
Great. Well, we're getting short of time, so I wanted to ask each of our business people, just quickly, what's the one thing you would like to see government do in your industry that would actually help this transition move faster and better? And is there one thing you'd like to see government stop doing as well? Sergio.
Well, telcos are regulators. They have a love story going on for decades already. So it's I got to be careful with what I say. But I think, as I mentioned before, we really have very clear economic incentives to try to reduce, reuse, recycle. We don't provide products, we provide services, so in a very competitive environment. So I'm not sure that regulation about this would actually help us a lot. Maybe it does, but I think maybe I can share a thought about one thing that I think it's important that they do, and it would really have a huge impact on how efficient we are and how sustainable we are as an industry. I think it's important that, especially for industries like ours that are heavily regulated, to bring this aspect into other elements of regulation. And for instance, it's been for decades, it still is unfortunately today, where many regulators believe that one way to enhance competition is to ensure that there are multiple infrastructures in place. And to me, it doesn't, or to anybody that's in the industry, it doesn't really make a lot of sense. When you think about cities like, I'm sure Paris is the case, many cities in Spain as well, and you have 3, 4 fixed networks in place, you offering the same service, it doesn't seem to be very efficient. It doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. It's like if you're, offering a transport system, and the way to make that competitive is to make sure that each one of us, we develop our own highways. I'm sure there should be some way to regulate competition through sharing of that infrastructure. It might be a little bit too late for some fiber deployments now in some countries that are more advanced, but I'm sure that looking forward, that's something that maybe regulators should have more on the top of their heads. There's obviously a trade-off between competition and some kind of waste that is produced by enforcing competition. Maybe there's a smarter way to do that.
Lucy, same question to you.
Yes, quickly. First, I would say that we really need a new approach and a comprehensive framework with an approach able to deal with environmental issue with an industrial point of view. And I would say that we started the shift, the move at the European level with the Green Deal. It's a good thing, but we need to accelerate with the new commission, with the new mandate, and in national places. It's a key issue for our industry. Then, as my colleague, we need the right incentive to change mindset towards circular economy. And then I would say generally that we do not need standards. We need confidence between public policers and companies like us to innovate, to invest, and to create jobs in national countries and in Europe. For the special sector of waste management, I would say two things which are very, very important for us. For recycling issues, we need requirements of level of incorporation of raw materials in new products and in new infrastructure, as you mentioned. It's the key issue to develop circular loops from waste and to make it, you told about economic attractiveness, it's exactly the point. Then we need proper eco-design rules and incentive. It's also a key issue. And for recovery issue, I think that we all share the view that when waste cannot be recycled, even if it's a pity, converting it into energy, electricity, heat, or biogas is a beneficial solution. I think it's a good thing for the environment because it replaces fossil fuels. So my wish list would be that the Commission, in particular, recognize this and we consider this activity as far as taxonomy for sustainable activities is concerned.
Yeah.
We are running out of time.
Yeah, so
I would say two things. Industrial are pragmatic people, so they need business who flies, as you said. So we need incentives first, and then we need to be, from a political standpoint, very pragmatic. I was talking about ATES, which is a solution which is really balanced with an outstanding COP, so efficiency level, but it's not. We have not got incentive on that subject. So we must push to have this kind of solution before carbonized solution. We need to have, I would say, incentive and regulation which are courageous enough to say the priority of things according to what we want. So if you want to have recycling, it should be guided and indicated in the policies. And it will help. So incentives and clear guidance, consistent on the long time. If we have financing and consistent guidance, we are able to innovate and scale. If not, and we are looking at the price of the gas versus the price of electricity to arbitrate, which is not a long-term solution.
Great. Well, we are pretty much out of time, so I'm just going to ask each panelist to give me one sentence on what they think the biggest opportunity in circularity over the next 5 years is that they're most excited about. I'm just going to quickly go down the line. Sergio.
So many of them. And again, for us, it's a need. I think anything that has to do with energy reduction and reutilization of equipment, I think that we will see, as consumers, we will see a huge push for refurbished mobile equipment like handsets in the very near term.
Great. Morel.
I would say eco-design. Lucy has mentioned already several times this. We are having a regulation which is about to be adopted on eco-design for sustainable products, and I think there will be important opportunities there. For instance, we will cover intermediate products such as steel, aluminium, glass, which are relevant for the built environment, for infrastructure, and we can offer guidance and even mandatory elements about the sustainability and mandatory recycled content. So putting a price tag on recycling.
Great. Paul?
Well, if we get that, and I think it's an important if, then I think the opportunity is in the financial sector. Because, I mean, there are lots of people, I think, from the financial sector here. This is going to take money. It's going to take investment. That investment has to have the right risk-return ratio. And it's up to the legislators to reduce the risk and ensure that there's a return. And then it's up to the smart guys in the audience who are in the financial sector actually to see those opportunities and make sure the money goes there and not into things like the oil and gas industry, which have to die if we are to have a livable future.
Lucy.
I fully agree with this, and that's that was the last point of of what I say about taxonomy for our activities, just to have a financial incentive to invest in this kind of infrastructure.
Great. And last word to you, Pierre.
I mean, I will copy. Infrastructure is an outstanding field of opportunities to consume less, greener, and flexible. So let's move forward with financing.
Brilliant. What a great note to end on. Thank you for a terrific panel, all 5 of you. Thank you. So while they leave the stage, we're now going to have a video set of remarks from Isabelle Autissière, the legendary sailor. And it's quite interesting to me how many sailors, I guess because they spend so much time sitting alone in nature, how they've been thinking about the circular economy. Ellen MacArthur in Britain is also a foundation that is playing a very big role in developing the circular economy. But let's hear now from Isabelle Autissière.
Donner l'occasion de m'exprimer devant vous. Moi, je parle d'un point de vue, d'un double point de vue, à la fois ingénieur, agronome à Lieut, donc scientifique, mais aussi citoyenne engagée. Et je voudrais partager quelques idées avec vous. La première, tout simplement, c'est que nous vivons sur une planète absolument exceptionnelle. Regardez le ciel quand vous êtes en mer ou en montagne, regardez le cosmos et dites-vous que nous sommes, pour peut-être des millions et des millions de planètes autour de nous, la seule avec de l'eau, avec une atmosphère et avec la vie, et ça, c'est pas rien. Et l'espèce humaine est au fond une espèce qui a eu une formidable réussite écologique, qui a colonisé à peu près tous les milieux. Mais cette réussite, on le sait, dans les espèces vivantes, n'est jamais acquise. Et aujourd'hui, ce sont nos comportements individuels, collectifs, notre manière de nous organiser tous ensemble, qui risquent de nous amener à une échéance relativement brève de quelques dizaines d'années, je sais que quelques dizaines d'années, c'est à peu près l'horizon des investissements pour les grands équipements, eh bien, risque de nous amener dans des difficultés extrêmes. Alors, je voudrais partager au moins 3 idées avec vous. La première, c'est qu'on représente souvent le développement durable comme étant l'intersection entre les questions environnementales, les questions économiques et les questions sociales. Et je crois que c'est une fausse représentation qui nous enduit d'erreurs. Pour moi, le développement durable, c'est d'abord une base, qui est la base régie par les lois de la physique, de la chimie et de la biologie, qui est donc l'ensemble des conditions environnementales dans lesquelles nous, l'espèce humaine, pouvons nous épanouir. Au-dessus de ça, il y a ce que les sociétés humaines peuvent construire, c'est-à-dire des sociétés économiques, des sociétés politiques, des sociétés sociales. Donc, ce qui est extrêmement important, c'est de ne pas oublier que la base, ce qui est le plus important, ce n'est pas une intersection de plusieurs choses, c'est vraiment la base environnementale. Et pour ça, ce qui va être important, c'est de remettre ces questions environnementales, cette base, au cœur même de l'ensemble de nos décisions et en particulier de nos décisions économiques. Il ne peut plus y avoir de vision stratégique, il ne peut plus y avoir de choix économiques qui n'intègrent pas l'empreinte carbone, l'empreinte eau, l'empreinte biodiversité au cœur même de la décision. Non pas comme une externalité qu'on prendra après, qu'on va mesurer après pour voir si on rentre dans le cadre de la RSE ou pas, mais vraiment à l'intérieur même de la décision. Et ça, c'est extrêmement important pour que nous puissions collectivement redresser la barre. Deuxième idée, c'est que les équilibres environnementaux que nous avons autour de nous sont ceux qui nous ont fait vivre. La disponibilité en air, en eau, en alimentation, en matières premières, là aussi, c'est la base de nos sociétés et de nos économies. Jusqu'à maintenant, cette disponibilité était gratuite. Nous ne mesurions que le coût d'aller les chercher. Mais au fond, le poisson dans la mer n'avait pas de valeur, seul comptait ce que nous mettions en œuvre pour aller chercher ce poisson. Et cette disponibilité était en plus extrêmement stable. L'être humain, dans les dernières dizaines de milliers d'années, a vécu des conditions climatiques, des conditions d'accès à la biodiversité extrêmement stables. Or, tout ça, du fait de l'action et des hommes, c'est fini. Nous rentrons, et nous le voyons bien, dans l'ère des crises. Elles vont être de plus en plus fréquentes, elles vont être de plus en plus violentes, et elles vont être de plus en plus diverses. Ce qui va nous obliger à commencer à penser l'impensable. Je prends un exemple que tout le monde peut partager facilement, la crise du Covid. Qui pouvait penser quelques semaines seulement avant que du jour au lendemain, les sociétés humaines dans leur ensemble, quasiment, se claquemureraient chez elles, s'enfermeraient chez elles, avec toutes les conséquences que l'on connaît. Et je crois qu'aujourd'hui, que l'on parle de la gestion des eaux avec les pénuries, les inondations, que l'on parle des vagues de chaleur ou des méga-feux, que l'on parle de l'envahissement d'un certain nombre de littoraux avec l'envahissement des infrastructures, des villes, des grands mouvements de population, on voit bien que tout ça va devenir de plus en plus fréquent et donc nous oblige à penser l'impensable. Et je voudrais juste attirer votre attention sur l'importance qu'il faut accorder aux signaux faibles. Et je reprends l'exemple du Covid. En 2015, un petit groupe de scientifiques qui travaillait pour l'ONU avait exactement prévu ce qui s'est passé. Ils avaient prévu une crise au coronavirus commençant dans le centre de la Chine et s'étendant rapidement au monde entier. Donc faisons attention à tous ces petits signaux à droite à gauche qui nous disent déjà des choses et qui sont déjà précurseurs de ce qui nous attend. La troisième idée, qui n'est pas la plus agréable, c'est que nous n'avons pas devant nous une marche, mais un mur. Et donc, nous n'avons pas besoin d'évolution, mais de révolution. Si je prends simplement l'empreinte carbone, celle d'un Français aujourd'hui est de 8 à 9 tonnes. En 2050, elle doit passer à 2 tonnes. C'est-à-dire qu'il faut la diviser par 4, ce qui est considérable, ce qui est un bouleversement dans nos manières de vivre, dans nos manières de produire, dans nos manières de consommer. Et c'est particulièrement vrai pour nous, les pays riches, puisque nous avons à la fois une empreinte carbone la plus importante, mais aussi nous avons une complexité en quelque sorte de société la plus importante également. En gros, pour reprendre une image, pour illustrer ce besoin de révolution et pas d'évolution, Je dirais qu'aujourd'hui, il ne sert à rien de décarboner le fonctionnement d'une tronçonneuse si c'est pour continuer à couper la forêt. Et pour être un peu plus près de vos préoccupations, il ne vaut pas seulement s'attaquer à recycler l'enrobé des autoroutes, ce qui est déjà très bien, mais il faut commencer à penser à recycler les autoroutes elles-mêmes le jour où nous ne roulerons plus dessus, car ce jour va arriver. Dernière idée, ce sont, je l'ai dit, les plus riches de la planète et les riches des pays riches qui sont responsables de plus de 10% par exemple des émissions de gaz à effet de serre. Et donc nous devons impérativement prendre en compte la sobriété et la justice climatique de manière à avoir une acceptabilité sociale et un partage du poids social en rapport avec le poids de ce que nous émettons et de ce que nous consommons. Voilà, dernière petite idée pour que quand même ne pas rester sur quelque chose de trop noir. Je crois que tous ces désordres sont humains avant tout, et ça c'est une bonne nouvelle. Ils seraient dus à une planète qui passerait trop près de nous, ils seraient dus à un dieu ou une entité suprême qui serait en colère. On pourrait peut-être pas faire grand-chose. Heureusement, c'est l'action des hommes qui est en cours. Et l'action des hommes, elle a su changer et elle a pu changer au travers des siècles. Donc il n'y a aucune raison pour qu'elle ne change pas maintenant, à condition que nous y soyons prêts et que nous soyons prêts à nous mobiliser et à agir pour ce changement. Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much. So we now have our second keynote speech. It's my pleasure to welcome to the stage Aileen Bergman, who is COO of CradleNet and co-founder and managing partner of Nordic Circular Hotspot. Aileen, over to you.
Thank you very much. And I will start by setting the clock because I promised to not do more than 15 minutes. Going. All right. Yes. So I run 2 circular economy business networks. I hope you can hear me now because I need to stand in front of the mic. CradleNet is one. It's one of the oldest circular economy networks in the world. We started in 2009, and that was before even the term circular economy existed. So we're based on a book called Cradle to Cradle, Remaking the Way We Make Things. And the network is all about making sure that businesses know what circular economy is, so they can act on it. We try to make sure they do business with each other and know each other, and we also try to influence policy. And I've been engaged with this since 10 years back. And the reason why I got engaged in circular economy is because fantastic woman, like the one before, is a sailor, and I'm a sailor too. And I saw a fantastic speech of Ellen MacArthur because I'm a sailor, and I was a fan of hers. And I saw her speech talking about circular economy, and I was blown away. It was like, this is so smart. Why are we not understanding this and working like this? So circular economy, I mean, it's about how we can keep the value of things for such a long time as possible. So it's not about recycling. We're talking about recycling and the life here a lot, but it's so much more than this. And I really wanted to talk about this a bit more. And I don't only run CradleNet, I also started another organization called the Nordic Circular Hotspot. And the Nordic Circular Hotspot is kind of similar to CradleNet, but it's working between the Nordic countries, make sure we collaborate more and transition to a circular economy faster. So we do a partnership program. We have 100 partners or so today. We have circular economy as partners among the partners. We have a digital platform called the Nordic Circular Arena. And we also have a big conference, a summit. And it's actually happening next week in Reykjavik in Iceland. And you can't miss it because it's free and it's open for everybody. Anyway, so everything we do in both networks is try to accelerate the transition to a circular economy faster. And we really are based on knowledge sharing a lot to do this. Okay, but before I start talking about all the opportunities in circular economy, I want to check if you listened. So I'm going to ask you, do you know how circular the world is today? You have to shout it out in percent. 7.9. No. Anyone else? 5? 25. 30. Okay, this was said in the beginning. It's 7.2%. circular, which means that we're wasting more than 90% of the valuable, precious resources we have on the planet. 90% is wasted. All right, we talked about this too, but I just want to remind you that about 40 to 70% of the global carbon emissions can be mitigated through circular economy. That's how we produce and consume things. 70%, and we're focusing mostly about renewable energy. Why are we doing this if this is where the problem lies? This is a map from the Global Footprint Network. They're doing it every year. It's the Global Overshoot Days. It's when, during the year, we as countries have started over-consuming the resources that the planet can replenish every year. And when you're on the beginning of the chart, in January, February, March, that's when you're as bad as you can be. So the worst country on the planet, it's Qatar. They're already in the beginning of February. That's when they have depleted all the resources that the planet can replenish. There are some countries that are not even on this map, and they are the sustainable ones. But if you look at this circle, it's the top 10 worst countries in the world, the Nordics, us, that are supposed to be the shining stars of sustainability, we are the worst. And the reason for that is because we consume so much. And we are so rich that we can consume so much. Overconsumption. And this is France. So you're not super good either. You have some work to do, but we are worse than you are. So we have a big problem here. But there are some financial opportunities. And I have to say, I mean, you are the financial guys in the room here. You're sitting on all the opportunities to make this happen. These are enormous opportunities. So the circular economy can contribute to $4.5 trillion by 2030, and as much as $25 trillion by 2050, according to Accenture. And we all listen to Accenture, don't we? And McKinsey says that adopting circular economy principles could not only benefit Europe, this is for Europe, environmentally and socially, but could also generate a net economic benefit of 1.8 trillion euros by 2030. So a lot of money here. And like I said in the beginning, we're wasting 90%, more than 90%. This is a picture that I love. I should have added a source. Oh, it actually says Paris Smart City 2050. Good, I have a source. I love this because when I try to find a picture of the future, usually you can only find like concrete and glass, really sterile, white buildings. And I don't really recognize the future that I want to live in. I love this picture, not only because we are in Paris right now, but also because we haven't torn down every single old building. I think that one of the most circular buildings that we have, or constructions, pieces of construction, is the Pont Neuf Bridge. I was there yesterday. It's over 500 years old. It's still in perfect condition. And you can just dismantle the whole bridge if you want to and move it somewhere else if the need is changed. And that's what the circular infrastructure should be all about. Like, we should not tear things down. It's not about recycling. It's how can we keep the value of these things as long as possible, but also make it efficient. And I don't even know how many millions of people that walked over that bridge. But this is what we should be striving for. This is the beautiful future. It's green. We are preserving the buildings. We're making them flexible. So if we want to move all these buildings, we can. We can dismantle the Eiffel Tower too, if we wanted to. But it's about like shifting with the needs that we have of the future. And usually when I talk about, I do these types of presentations all the time, it's when I start talking about the circular business models, what's going to happen, that people wake up. This is actually a presentation of what's already happening. So I'm going to tell you some things about what's going on, but I want to start with the most important thing you can focus on is the design phase. How we design things, and not only things, but also services. 80%. This is where you can do the difference. This is a project that's already happening in Sweden. It's called CC Build. It was initially a small project where IVL, one of my member companies, it's a research institute, looked at how can we gather everybody in the construction, infrastructure sector, architects, everybody in this sphere, and see how we can work together to become circular. And they now have, I think it's like 300 members or so. They do events all the time, but it's especially about knowledge sharing, but also creating platforms like the product bank, an inventory app, services and products, where you can find everything super easy. And I highly recommend that you do something similar in France. And it's very successful, and you should really go in and look at it. Like I said in the beginning, design is super important. I just wanted to give you an example of circular design. This is what you should be thinking about. Like if you construct a building, you shouldn't look at it as a building. It's a need to have shelter, right? We people need shelter. We need a place to cook food and sleep and so on. But a building in the future is not just a building. It's also a carbon sink where we can suck in the carbon. It should be flexible, so you can dismantle this building. It should also be a place where you can grow food, create energy, have a nutrient source. Because right now we're making toilets, sewage, and we mix it together with detergents and dishwashing soap and things. We're basically poisoning a fantastic nutrient source that we should put back into the fields again. We can harvest rainwater and circulate that in the buildings and so on. So they should be all organic, living, thriving ecosystems, not just buildings. That's boring. There are already some fantastic enabling platforms out there, and I'm just showing you this. It's not so much about infrastructure, but these are some of the projects that are being heavily invested in already. And digitalization is super important to make sure circular economy can happen. And these are just a few of them. ThreadUp, for instance, they're working with secondhand fashion, for instance. Black Market is online marketplace for refurbished electronics. And even Alibaba has financed Idle Fish with over 500 million users in China. And it's also transactions for secondhand goods. So it's all of these platforms are enabling the circular economy. There are some of these digitalization platforms already in use for construction. This is one, Concular. I think they're also in the report, by the way, where you can add buildings and you can share and find materials and products that can be used for new projects for construction. There are many of these out there, but this is just one example. This is another thing we talked about before, reuse in public buildings. I just need to check the time, sorry. Okay, good, I only have 3 minutes left. This is an example from the city of Gothenburg in Sweden, where they did a public procurement assignment that white architects won. And they were going to do the interior design of the building. And they got 12.8 million Swedish kroner to do the project. But they actually went 80% under budget. So the project cost was only 4 million in the end, because they used recycled and reused materials and products. And they also saved a lot of carbon, which is amazing. And they won prizes. Very good. We talked about zero waste. I mean, one of the good things to look at when you start with circular economy is look at the waste streams you have. But that's downstream. You should always look at what you're doing in the first place, like designing your products and services. But zero waste is a very good goal and target to have. You shouldn't have any waste, because waste is precious resources that I mentioned before. This is a project, Zero Waste Scotland. So if you want to have some inspiration, look at that. This is a fantastic company that I have as members. They're called Acus. They make circular signs to have on buildings and so on. They make them super circular from the beginning. They even have a service, but the most inspirational part is they refuse to sell signs. This might seem a bit strange, but their business model is refusing. And refusing is one of the R's that are usually left when you talk about circular economy. We talk about reduce, reuse, recycle, but refuse is even better. So what they do when they get an assignment to well, I want to buy 5 signs from you. I have a school, for instance, and I want 5 signs with the school name on. They send out a person that do their own evaluation and say, hey, when I looked at the building, I think you only need 2. You don't need more than 2 signs. We will only sell you 2 signs. So they do. And that might be strange because they will, not earn as much money, but they actually get more customers in doing this because they trust them and they save money and also, of course, environment and so on. Very good. This is a project upcycling. They use already used materials for making new construction. And it's in Denmark. It's an upcycle house. You can look into it if you want to read more about it, because I need to move on. And also, there are some fantastic guidelines. We already talked about this. Maybe guidelines is not exactly what we're after, but if you want to learn more about infrastructure and circular economy, there are some fantastic guidelines and projects already happening. And this is just one example. It's European funded. It's including London, Bordeaux, Lisbon, Milan, Warsaw, and I think it's Bulgaria? I can't see. And it's about the sharing economy also. It's like, how can you share the resources? You don't have to buy your own car. It's about sharing different types of transportation and so on. So sharing economy is a very, very, very important part of the circular economy. And also regenerating nature. Regenerative materials is going to be the next big thing because it's going to save resources. It's going to be acting as a carbon sink. It's also going to replenish a lot of biodiversity. So if you're going to build something in wood, do it in a regenerative way. And even Unilever made a fantastic report on how to do this. So, okay, my time is up. The last slide is recycling. That's, of course, an important part, but it's the last thing you should do in the circular economy. And there are some fantastic opportunities here, too. We need to recycle the batteries we're doing for the electric cars and also for solar panels and so on. And it's going to be worth so much money. And of course, the EU taxonomy and CSRD is forcing everybody now to report on circular economy, not only carbon emissions, biodiversity, water and marine resources, pollution, but also circular economy. And this is creating so much momentum in the business sector. So that's fantastic. And that's all I had. And I just want to say that you join the circular transition because we have no time to waste. Thank you.
Great. We'll now move on to our second panel. If I'd like to invite the panelists up on stage, we have David Greenfield, who is VP of Circular Economy Institute, Martin Lopez Cardozo, who is CEO of Circular Economy, Marie Muir, CEO of Resourcify, Christopher Hoog, Deputy CEO of Vinci Autoroutes, and Olivier Bruce, CEO of ID Verdi. And just quickly, a couple of things. I'm actually slightly wrongly identified on the list here. I was actually at The Economist for many years, not the New York Times. Still, both fine publications. So I'm very happy to be at the New York Times, but wasn't. And then a number of these conversations before today, a number of the speakers that you'll have heard today took part in a series of podcasts that Vauban has hosted on their website on talking about circular infrastructure that I moderated. So please check those out if you're keen to go deeper even than we've been able to go today. I'm going to go and sit in the middle over here. So in the first panel, we really heard about how the circular infrastructure message is starting to take hold and some of the challenges that are out there for business and opportunities for business. In this panel, we're really going to focus on scaling and accelerating the circular economy transition that I think we've already, are pretty clear is underway. What do we need to do to make this much faster? And I'm going to start with Martine, who every year in Davos publishes a gap report that looks at the actual level of circularity in the economy compared with what it needs to be. Martine, just talk a bit about, for you, how far do you think this is really taking hold as an idea, and what do we need to focus on now over the next few years as we try to accelerate this transition? And the mics are in front of you.
Well, I think the number 7.2 has been repeated 6 times. So I think in this audience, I think it's getting relatively well adopted. That being said, I think as Jan has pointed out, if you just look at the numbers, they're quite staggering, right? 100 billion tons of materials. We used more materials in the last sort of 6-7 years than in the whole previous century combined. It's going to double again. And if you look at sort of the 4 basic human needs, so shelter, built environment, food, mobility, and consumables, it's 80-90% of all the materials used, with a devastating effect on greenhouse gas, roughly half, and even a much larger portion, over 80% of biodiversity loss. So I feel, if you look a little bit at the bigger picture and see, all the, rightly so, focus on renewable energy and all the efforts we're taking in phasing out coal, this needs to be the big next revolution that needs to happen to save mankind.
And but for businesses in particular, investors in particular, what do you think are the things they should really be giving most attention to at the moment as they think about acceleration?
Yeah, so I think in principle, you need to do sort of 4 things across those big 4 systems, right? So, use less materials, use them for longer. So basically slow down our metabolism, keep things in use, use regenerative inputs and bio-based materials, and then of course cycle at the end. And I think, across those all of those 4 stages, and I think that's actually quite interesting in the report, there's new business models and new ways to think about that. And I would actually argue that if you overlap that, and I've been sort of serial entrepreneur, and also my last company was in the circular economy, there's of course a limited set of space where, applying those principles overlap with profitable business models. And I think it's up to the regulatory forces to make sure that overlap becomes bigger and bigger. But I think especially in infrastructure, and I will talk about that, given the long life cycles, given the high capex intensive, a lot of these levers actually are quite powerful. So I think this is actually a very fertile ground for applying circular economy principles.
David, tell us a bit about the Circular Economy Institute and what you're doing about helping to accelerate this transition.
Thank you for the... I've got the mic that works. The Circular Economy Institute is actually a volunteer group that is trying to actually have a standard approach to circular economy across the world. We're made up of 2 parts. We have circular economy clubs, of which there are 280 across the world, led by volunteers that are trying to embed circular economy in individual cities. It was very interesting during COVID that in the States, for example, we went from 3 clubs to 48 during lockdown, because people were starting to see circular economy as an opportunity to engage in something that was necessary to try and reduce the climate impacts that they were seeing as a result of understanding more about life in a locked down world where you're starting to see nature and you're starting to see resources. But what the Institute's doing is putting in place training that allows a worldwide baseline to be able to enable people to go, okay, I can understand circular economy at a basic level. I can understand the systems, the approaches, the case studies, and then look at how I can apply that to my business. We've got different levels, but fundamentally, what we're starting to see is that we have a lot of large organisations that are going, okay, we know circular, we know we need to become circular, but we don't have the skill sets internally, we don't have our teams, we don't have our staff members that are actually understanding it fully. So we need to train them up to be able to enable them to take on board all of the challenges that are coming down the line to ensure that we can get the investment in the right area. It's brilliant that we have champions and it's brilliant that we've got people here, but we have to have that trickle-down effect of knowledge to ensure that those that are doing some of the day-to-day activities are also incorporating circular into their day-to-day activities.
Great. Olivier, as a business, you know, we've heard at the high level that we need to have this circular transition. We've heard the politicians say, and the regulators say, yes, we've got to do it. And as business leaders, increasingly business leaders are talking the talk. But when you look inside the business, and you're often dealing with a lot of people who have their ways of doing things, their incentive structures, everything is in place to do it the old way. How do you think about what can be done? How do you practically do it internally to transition your business, and what lessons learned so far for you?
Yeah, our business. So ID Verde, until recently, was the largest European kind of green services and landscaping service provider. But we're fast transforming it into a solution provider. What do I mean by that? I mean that one needs to look at nature and green spaces, especially in urban environments, not only as an element of aesthetics and well-being, but as a solution to transition to and to adapt to climate change. Let me give you a couple of practical examples where the demand for these new solutions is. One of the main challenges of cities today, as we speak in the fall season, will be to expand their sewer networks in order to deal with the new pattern of intense rain, or avoid expanding them because it's going to cost a fortune. They've been built on average 100 years ago, so not in the world we're living in today. And obviously this is going to create massive roadworks, resource need, etc. Well, one way to avoid expanding them is to redesign our cities so that they absorb rainfall in a better way than they do today. It means that we need to activate green spaces, trees, parks, a little bit like the Asian cities already do with the concept of sponge cities, in order to activate nature in cities, in order to protect our assets, capture rainwater, and avoid sending it to sewer networks, wastewater plants with all the energy needed to treat it, etc. So the demand we see today, I'll give you two examples. One in Copenhagen that was hit a couple of years ago, but what they call cloudburst, massive rainfall that created a lot of damages. Unfortunately, this is a pattern we see more and more in our cities today. As a consequence, they decided to review the urban plan with the focus on protecting assets from heavy rainfall. And we're currently redesigning an entire suburb of Copenhagen as a sponge suburb, so that the objective is to disconnect rainfall from sewers. Yeah, we're doing the same in Geneva with a new development in the suburbs where the permit was granted only if the new development was not to use the sewer network for rainwater. So in other words, what I'm trying to say is that nature in cities needs to be seen today as an element of infrastructure and no longer just as an element of aesthetics and well-being. And the good news is that if we activate nature in cities, then we can start to deliver benefits like protecting assets, while at the same time, protecting the well-being of citizens. So we're talking about business solutions and not only, passive nature.
And just spell out the the economic choice you've made there by shifting from being the green infrastructure to being the solutions provider? Why are you making that change?
Well, first, because this is a demand from cities, clients. They are, I'm struck, and in a way that's not surprising, how desperate they are to find solutions to adapt their cities. If you take the cities around the Mediterranean, Cannes, Nice, Montpellier, etc., are all very mineral, built in a different time. They've been hit recently by massive storms in the fall, episode 7 with a lot of damages, even casualties, unfortunately. And basically, they are coming to us and say, what can we do? How can we use nature, green spaces? How can our city adapt to a little bit like Singapore or Beijing, etc., to deal with the new pattern of climate change? So we're no longer talking about providing services. We're talking about coming up with solutions. I'll give you one example. It's so important. In Glasgow, Scotland, the city has decided, because of course, for those of you who know Glasgow, it's built on top of the River Clyde, and every time there is a Scottish storm, as we know there are regular ones there, it washes down the streets, down to the Clyde, creating a lot of pollution and cost, etc. Well, they decided to review the tree linings alongside the streets, what they call green-blue infrastructure now, which means that basically underground, every tree benefits from almost 43 tons of topsoil connected together. Yeah, if I take Paris, it's a statement, it's not a criticism. On average, it's 7 to 8 tons separated from each other. Over there, 43 tons connected together. Why? Because they want the trees to absorb as much as rainwater as they can, protect the sewers and the cities, and sweat it back during heat waves. So this is the new pattern that we're going to see more and more. You take the same tree, but you activate it, you treat it differently so that you maximize the environmental benefits you get from them.
I never thought I'd hear Glasgow being talked about in the context of heat waves, but I guess this is the world we're living in.
They started with storms.
Exactly. Christophe, I mean, Da Vinci's, obviously you are a leader in this circular infrastructure transition. And I'm interested, road infrastructure is seen as a very traditional industry. How have you gone about trying to convert your business to embracing this green future?
Well, there is a lot of work to do, but the good news is that we are on it. I would just like to give a few figures about the road in France. The road is the main mode of transport for good and for person. It's more than 85% of flows in France. And all the forecasts are saying that till after 2050, the road will still stay the main way of transporting people and goods. The other point is that the road is responsible for 30% of the carbon emission in France. That's a huge amount, and transport is the only sector that has been increasing since 1990. And if you make a close-up on motorways that are 1% of the network, it's 25% of the emission of the road network. So then there is a kind of equation that if you want to decarbonize the country, you have to decarbonize the transport, and if you want to decarbonize the transport, you have to decarbonize the road, beginning with the motorways. So on a global point of view, we're working on circularity with 3 main topics. First one being changing the way we operate the motorway. It's the smallest subject. We are trying to reach the 100% waste recovery. We're currently at 91% and minus 50% in carbon emission in our operation. The second subject is bigger. It's about how the way we handle our construction site and maintenance of the network. And the maintenance is growing bigger and bigger as the network is aging. But the good thing is that we can reuse some material that have already been used to create the initial infrastructure that has already been excavated. So currently our main target is to recycle a maximum of materials from the infrastructure to maintain it and to lessen the need for energy on the construction sites. And the third topic, which is the biggest, is how we change the infrastructure, how we change the use of the infrastructure. And so we have been working on a transformation plan of the motorway, which is based on mitigating and adapting. And the target, the main targets, especially for carbons and use, are to work on infrastructure for new carbon-free vehicles, charging unit, biogas, hydrogen. They have to be spread all around the network. Also developing shared mobilities with public transport, dedicated lane, more people in less vehicles. And also to improve the energy production, because what was in infrastructure in the 20th century is becoming an hybrid system of mobility and energy. So we have to contribute to the production of energy, and we have a large real estate that can be used for solar panels. What is important for us is that the road network is existing. It's a great network of high quality, and it's very adaptive. So we can make it shift toward other uses. We can use the existing material to make something that is compliant with the target of 21st century.
And just talk about how hard a sell was that transition to your own people? Was it something they all said, yeah, we buy this vision, or was there a lot of resistance to it?
You're talking about our employees? Well, everybody's in. I mean, everybody's conscious of the great turn that we have to take. We are working in a sector that is responsible for most of the carbon emission in France. So we want to be part of the solution.
Marie, so tell us a bit about Resourcify and what you do and what your vision is for accelerating the shift, particularly around circular infrastructure.
So we are a cloud-based waste management and recycling platform. We work with enterprise businesses and waste management companies alike, but we target enterprise customers that they can use our platform to digitalize all of their waste management. So we're actually downstream. And what we see is that the digitalization is also often an issue. Data transparency is not given. So what we do once they're onboarded, we want to give them full transparency of that waste data to be able to optimize and change their ways. So we do this in 3 ways because, so it's the transport part to see how often waste is being picked up. Can you minimize that? Then the residual waste quota, how much of my resources are actually burned, is incinerated in the end, how can I change it and how can I get out the resources? And the last one is also, I think, very important, is the incentive is to see what prices do I pay for recyclers and where can I actually reduce those prices. And on top of this, we give them benchmarks to see how they're doing compared to their industry and how they can do better. So our idea is to hand the transparency back to the waste producers, basically, for them to analyze it and then to take the right steps to do so.
Just give us a sense of the big picture here. I mean, how much of this is relatively easy to trace and track, and how much of it is still you've got to think up new ways to do that?
It's very difficult, I'm not going to lie. So basically, you start with companies that have not looked at the waste properly. I wouldn't say properly, but they have not digitalized it and have not been able to analyze the data. Knowledge is missing. Also, it's still not at the core of their business. It's seen as one of the topics. So for us, it's very difficult to power this and to make it faster. But the customers that we see coming towards us, they have the will to do so. And I think this is the important part. And then you can take them and enable them and guide them to the correct or the best solutions.
And just as you go out to the market with your platform, are you finding more traction with people who have a sort of compliance mindset, or is it more people who say, I can really see how I can make some money out of this?
I think it's both actually. So compliance is a very big part. So I think like the policies do work. We've seen a lot of customers coming towards us because they need to comply in the future and they currently don't, or they don't know how to do it. But the other one is also with a lot of the insecurities that we have seen in past couple of years. We've got the coronavirus, the supply chain issues that we had. So they're looking for other ways to also mitigate those risks, reduce the costs, and then they turn towards their waste and to find also cost reductions, but also resources in the waste.
Martine, I wanted to come back to you briefly. First on this point about data and transparency, and you produced this number, 7.2% that we're all talking about. I mean, as an economist, I've always sort of thought, lies, damn lies and statistics. How good is the data that we're getting? How fast is the quality of the data improving? And how much do you think the improvement in the quality of data is going to drive the transition?
Yeah, before everybody doubts the 7.2% number. Actually, it's easy to do it on a global scale because basically, except for I think very few materials actually leave Mother Earth, so everything gets cycled around. So the data there is quite reliable. When you get more at the granular level, right? So you're operating at the individual company level. We worked with about 50 cities, about 50 nations have now done a Circularity Gap Report, also a couple of regions. That's often where you get into a lot of data issues. And, now I'm mostly talking about the global north. If you go to the global south, often you really have to almost sort of build the data ground up. So that's sort of a bit of reality. That being said, I always take the position of, we know there's a big problem. Let's use the data that we have and not and we'll come back to measurement and data as well. It's like, well, we don't have the data and it's hard to measure, so let's ignore it. We know the problem is quite big. We can roughly estimate it for a lot of sectors. I'm actually quite pleased that when I heard the statistics on the road that, companies are starting to be really aware of the space they're in and the impact they have and the responsibility they feel. And, maybe it's plus or minus 20%, but that's enough to take action.
Okay. One of the things I really like about the report that you've all got copies of today is that there are lots of examples of innovation, particularly innovation in this third pillar around completely redesigning and rethinking the way a sector, particularly part of the infrastructure sector, works. And I wanted to get our panelists to talk a bit about some of those most cutting-edge innovations and rethinks in the system. And I'll start with Christoph. This notion of infrastructure as a service, I keep hearing this phrase. It's what does it mean? What are you doing about it?
For most of the changes of the use of the road and of the motorway, you need to have infrastructures adapted, and it can deliver specific services. I have a good example. Mr. Ardouin was talking earlier of the ERS, Electric Road System. Just to give a little overview, currently we are seeing that the freight transport is going to change toward a carbon-free system using electric trucks. This is implying vehicles with very large batteries. And this is implying also some difficulties with the charging moments and the autonomy of these vehicles. The ERS is basically a system that is allowing the road to deliver the energy to the truck while it is driving, the energy for the momentum and the energy to charge the battery. And it's very interesting on a global circular point of view because it's going to reduce the need for raw material to build the batteries. If you take a long distance truck, the battery size is about 7 tons. We could reduce it to 2 tons if we were having ERS network to feed the battery while the trucks are driving. So it's very important for the price of the trucks, for the carrier. It's very important for the natural resources that's going to be spared, and also for the ability to develop the float and to have less dependency on a geopolitical point of view. You can mix this with what we call carbon corridors, which would be similar to what is existing between trucks and railway currently. You could imagine that we have a captive fleet of electric trucks on the motorway using this electric road system, and fossil-fueled trucks would arrive at the entrance of the motorway, give their goods on these trucks that would be transported only with this mean. So that would accelerate very, very fast the way that freight transport is decarbonized.
And I mean, all infrastructure companies operate within an ecosystem of people who use the infrastructure, people who build the infrastructure, and so forth. When you start using a phrase like infrastructure as a service, is that easily understood? Is that something that you have to get the rest of the ecosystem to sign up to before you can really do it? How does it work?
No, it's not easily understood. We're talking about new concepts. It was a very siloed world in the 20th century when we did build the infrastructure. Some people were doing the roads, some people were doing vehicles, some more people were doing energy, some people were doing transport, but nobody was really talking to each other. So all these services are implying that many people are around the table to work together. And that's not easy to do that.
I think on the podcast you said you'd like to be about 1 or 2 years ahead of the center of gravity in the ecosystem, because you felt that was, you could choose to be further ahead in your ambitions, but there's no point in getting too far ahead.
No, I was talking a little earlier about how we work on decarbonizing and making more sustainable the way we maintain the network. We are heavily working on recycling, for example. If we are asking too much of recycling to the contractors we're working with, they will not be technically able to do it because it needs specific equipment, specific conditions. So we're trying to put everybody on the tip of the toes, but not being too far away because we need to have partners working with us.
So as well as infrastructure as a service, the report refers to things like sharing infrastructure, infrastructure retrofit, industrial symbiosis, and so forth. David, what do you make of these terms? And are there a series of new business models emerging that you really think are going to take infrastructure in a very different direction?
I don't think they're new. I think they've always been there. They just haven't been adopted properly. And that's one of the challenges. I've been involved in construction for over 20 years, and it's still one of the most powerful images that we put in place in, I think, 2007, was a skip full of rubbish, and put it at the price, it was about £100 per skip at the time in the UK. Put that in front of civil engineers. We have circular mics. Put that in front of civil engineers and said, yeah, that's the cost of a skip. And they go, yeah, that's fine, we can cope with that. Then the slide drew away to show the iceberg of all of the value of materials in the skip, and the value of the materials in the skip was over £1,000. They went, oh, we're throwing that away. And they started implementing circular business models, even though it wasn't circular at the time. They were looking at industrial symbiosis. They were looking at how they reduce the amount of waste that they generate on site. What we are starting to see now, though, with the likes of industrial symbiosis and the data that we need to be able to power these business models, is a new understanding of what are the levers that are required. So we've talked already, and the previous panel talked about construction, but also retrofit. And from a circular economy point of view, I think you have to look at them from the same perspective, but with slightly different interventions. It's a lot easier to design a new build or new infrastructure from a circular economy perspective than it is to retrofit. However, if we look in Western Europe, 90% of the buildings that are going to be in Europe in 2050 are already built. So we have to start looking at how we can implement circular in there. That means retrofitting with regenerative materials, new materials, not using high carbon materials. It means when you are retrofitting, making sure that you're designing for the next life, the next retrofit. There's too many instances where we're actually building in essentially obsolescence because we do something, we add multi-materials, and then 10 years down the line, somebody's going, okay, I can't do anything with that. So we need a combination of the right data, the right vision, and all of the business models that you mentioned absolutely have to come as part of the next step.
Olivier, you talked about the shift that's taking place from viewing nature through an aesthetic lens in the city, and we saw Ellen's picture of Paris in the future with all the greenery around the buildings that looked so attractive. But we hear a lot about resilience, we hear a lot about circularity. Just sketch out the new language of this and the relationship between things like resilience and circularity, and generally how you talk about these solutions in a way that feels compelling to the people running cities and so forth.
Yeah, I'll give you one example, as you mentioned. Until recently, we used to, in cities, design, build, maintain what we call rooftop gardens for the neighborhoods and the businesses, the buildings that could afford them. Today, we're talking about green rooftop covers. Why? Because the purpose has shifted in order towards, on one hand, capturing rainwater as much as we can. On the other hand, for some buildings, lowering the temperature inside in the summer. Yeah, flat rooftop industrial building or municipal building, etc. So basically, we're shifting the purpose of, we're using the same type of nature, topsoil, grass, trees, etc. But if we want to treat it as a solution, as a piece of urban infrastructure, we need to demonstrate the environmental benefits. And in our sector, the innovation that is coming fast is about monitoring the environmental benefits of nature. I'll give you one example. Today, thanks to the Google cars that travel in the cities to take a picture of every building, every road, etc. Today, we've got a pilot scheme with them so that they give us a 3D picture of every green asset in the city. Yeah. And then there is an American software called iTree, some of you I'm sure are familiar with it, which will give from a 3D picture of any type of tree the amount of carbon that is stored in the tree. So if we've got a good way to have a kind of survey of green assets in a city and monitor the carbon activity of these trees, hedges, etc., hedgerows, etc., then we can demonstrate the environmental benefits of these green assets, and one day we will be able to monetize it. Same with biodiversity. I encourage you to look at what is going on starting in November in the UK. It is a fantastic laboratory because they introduced the Environmental Act, whereby every building construction permit will be linked to the overcompensation of the biodiversity destroyed. It's called biodiversity net gain, up to 110% over 30 years. So if you want to build, no problem, as long as you buy biodiversity units that will overcompensate over 30 years. The beauty of it is twofold. One is that they've put in place a monitoring system to calculate the biodiversity destroyed and the one that can be created elsewhere. They are in the 4th version of it. And the second point is they create what they call biodiversity unit market, i.e. you want to build, that's fine, but you have to buy units. And these units will come from, the royal parks in London, the golf courses in Scotland, etc. Any green space that can be activated to generate this 110% that is needed. Now, it starts in November. It will be interesting to see the price of the biodiversity units, to see the reaction of the landowners. I may activate my space in order to generate this biodiversity that will generate a revenue over the next 30 years. So the point is that innovation in our space will come from technological monitoring of the environmental benefits. And as soon as we can demonstrate these benefits, we can monetize them with industrials, construction companies that want to compensate their environmental footprint. For me, the transformation of our sector and the use of our sector is very similar to what we experienced 30 years ago with the waste industry. You remember 30 years ago, waste was waste. I started my career collecting waste and sending it to a landfill. That was it. Until the industry and the public sector started to separate passive waste from active waste, you know, passive nature versus active nature, and tried to create value, revenues from active waste. Well, that's the future of our industry. Active nature, if we monitor and demonstrate its benefits, will start to generate revenues that will then fund more active nature in cities.
Marie, presumably this discussion of data is music to your ears, but where are you seeing the most obvious opportunities that businesses using your platform can quickly make money?
Well, if they actually use the platform and then look at the data, they can either, start separating more waste streams and even gaining more resources out of it, so you can make money with that. So I think it's a very compelling business case. And on top of that, what you also can do, we design take-back programs with our customers. So it's a very interesting case that we have. So we take back medical systems. Instead of incinerating them, we disassemble them and bring them back by recycling with our recycling partner. So there are a lot of programs out there, and we know of a lot of programs. So I think the benefit, if you understand your waste and what you can do with it, to then partner up with us, so we can guide you to design programs to recycle your products, basically.
Is there an industry you look at and you think, gosh, I keep banging on their door and they're not listening, but there's a huge opportunity here?
I mean, we've been working with the medical industry, and there is a huge potential, I think, because the instruments are used for a very short amount of time and then they're incinerated. And I do think that there is some momentum in there, and they have understood it and they really want to do something. So I think we have been banging, but they opened the door, so that's great.
And there, the public concern is reusing stuff that has been...
Yes, you have to sterilize it, basically, and that is a bit of an issue. So I think, but here there's a huge amount of potential, because, the hospitals, they also have to pay for the waste, basically. So it's a win-win situation, because you can use it as a sales tool, because also we want to do business, right? But then again, you support the circular economy, and you support the hospitals to reduce their waste.
And is it your sense that regulation is a problem in this area, that actually it's stopping people thinking as creatively as they could do around some kind of recycling?
Yes, so I think there should be a bit of a more open ways to it. We've been talking to policymakers as well. We can do it, but it's not something that has been widely adopted. So I think if you look at different industries as well, I think there might be even more potential. We have not looked into that yet, but I think in the medical industry there's definitely a good potential.
I mean, I've been very conscious as we've been talking that we've been really focused on the developed world, where in a way a lot of the infrastructure is already embedded, built, needs modernising. The sewers are 100 years old or whatever. And we seem to be in this bifurcated world where you have the developed world needing to repurpose, modernise its infrastructure, and then the developing world, which is where a lot of the increase in GDP is going to happen over the next few years. They have a chance to redesign and rethink from scratch how they do their infrastructure. What do any of you want to talk a bit about? Are you seeing in the developing world models that seem to be ahead, leapfrogging what's going on in the developed world, and to what extent can we learn from that? Martin, maybe?
I'm happy to comment, and the way we looked at it in I think was 2 or 3 reports back, we tried to divvy up the world a bit in build, shift, and grow, sort of 2 mindsets. And of course, if you're a developed nation, and I think you used the word leapfrogging, I think especially the design element is quite crucial, right? So if you're going to put infrastructure in the ground right now and you're building out massive infrastructure, you want to be really, really careful about what design principles you use, so you're not faced with some of the issues that we heard before, right? Like, we heard, I think, Paul talk about the state of the buildings in the UK, and now being sort of a massive burden on the economy. So you would try to avoid those things, and I think there's lots of ways to do that.
David.
Yeah, in the Circular Economy Institute, we undertook a global mapping in 2018 of circular economy initiatives, and we did this across 70 cities and gathered a huge amount of information. Made that available. It's still open source for anybody to access. But what we saw there was a lot of emerging countries and emerging economies looking at the mistakes that have happened in the developed world and learning from them. And some of them are really quite simple, but very visionary at the same time. So we've seen projects in the desert where they're actually using sand as the replacement for concrete. So they're using the natural resources that are locally acquired. I'm working with a company in London which is creating insulation from growing mycelium. So taking a waste product, growing mycelium spores on it and creating a new insulation product which is as good as the existing plastic. Now that's going to be put into new homes in the next 5 or 10 years, and that will be a carbon positive material. So we need to get these lessons out there. There's enough innovation out there. I think one of the challenges we have is how we scale it up and how do we get the developing nations where by 2050, 70% of the infrastructure on this planet is yet to be built. We need to get that design element in now and help them understand how they can embed circular in the new infrastructure. That, for me, I think is our biggest challenge as a society, because if we don't help them design in circularity, we're just going to consume, and eradicate all of the materials that we're trying to protect.
So we're almost out of time, but I wanted to sort of end by looking at one of the big conclusions of this report, which is that cities are going to have to be the driver of so much of this transition to circular infrastructure and the circular economy. And yet we know that cities, are not always the most creative with their infrastructure policies. And so I wanted to get from each of you a sense of, how you're dealing with cities to try and get them to change, what changes you're looking for. And I'm going to start with you, Christoph. I mean, you talked about motorways, which obviously are largely connecting cities or going through cities and historically have been cutting off the integration of the city. Where are you actually seeing positive opportunities inside cities?
Not inside maybe, but around. The motorway network is reaching several big cities in France. And there is a very large link between the solution we can implement for climate change and for reducing inequalities in the access to mobility around cities. Currently, 75% of people are using every day their car to go to work. And this figure is increasing if you go in the outskirts of cities, in the distant outskirts, you go up to 87%. So there is a real peri-urban issue to offer access to health, work, education to the people living in these areas. And usually they are not the one with biggest salaries also, so there is a huge social point, very linked to what we have known with the yellow jacket. So what we want to promote is access to the carbon-free vehicles, access to the carbon-free infrastructures at a decent price, but also development of shared mobility, which is a great solution to offer some service, reduce carbon emission, and reduce the cost of transportation. We currently have some difficulties to see the development of carpooling or of multimodal transport because it's complicated. Still 83% of people are alone in their car every morning. We have 1.26 person in one car instead of the target of 1.75. But we have a good example of what we can do with shared mobility in the south of Paris on a site that's called Plessis-Mornay, where we did build a park where people can gather from surrounding villages, and then they take a bus that go on the motorway and directly to reach hub railway of Massy that is allowing them to distribute all Paris services. And this offer is very comfortable for the one using it, very efficient on a carbon point of view because it's dividing by 2 the carbon emissions, and it's dividing by 10 the cost of the transport for these people. So a new offer, less money to spend, better carbon emissions. We win on every side.
Great. Olivier, briefly on cities, what are you finding?
Listen, I've been, because of the responsibilities I held over the years, I've been meeting with city officials for, the last 30 years, really. And I have to say, I'm absolutely struck by the fact that this is the first time almost in 30 years that I see city officials, one, really asking for solutions and not only services. They're really saying, okay, can we have a working group? Can we work on it together? So can you show us what works? Yeah. That's the first thing. And the second thing, which I think is great for our industry, your industry, is that I feel for the first time the return and the need for public-private partnerships or PFIs or whatever. They understand that the public sector alone, on its own, will not be able to deliver and fund these new solutions. So what do? I spend my time traveling to Copenhagen, to Glasgow, to Geneva, to Washington, D.C., the way they activated Rock Creek Park in order to replace or protect the sewers, as opposed to other cities. Because city officials, in a word, they are desperate for innovation and solutions in order to adapt their cities to climate change. And 2, they are now convinced that the private sector has a role to play. For me, this is the return of a new form of PPP.
Great. Well, we're pretty much out of time. I'm going to ask each panelist to say one closing thought in a sentence, please, about what the biggest opportunity that they're most excited about for scaling up this transition. And let's start with Marie.
Yeah, so obviously I think that the data that we provide our customers with is the one that we need to scale. And on top of this, there's a lot of great programs already out there. So use them and get on board with it. Just don't wait until you have completely changed all of the ways that you work with, I think. There's already great things out there, and I think I would love to see that all of the enterprises, businesses that really show willingness to change, that they also, are enabled to do so.
Great. Martin, one sentence, please.
Yeah, I would say I think the compelling vision. I think we saw the beautiful pictures of Ellen with the green cities. We also recently worked with C40, 14 million jobs, a lot of more jobs for circular economy, and I think politicians and companies will ultimately react to the world we all want to have.
David?
I think the opportunity as well as the challenge is to look at how we finance the transition. We have a huge amount of startups with opportunities that can help deliver circular economy, but we also have a lot of risk-averse investment, which means that investment only goes in once certain projects have been proven. I'm working with many at the moment that are finding it very difficult to find £100,000 to get to the next level, but everyone's saying, we'll invest if you've got 20 billion. So we need to look at that investment and innovation space and ensure that we're getting the funding to those innovative businesses that can then accelerate as quickly as possible.
Christophe?
To change the transport sector and to make it compliant with the target we have in 21st century, we have to change our mindset and make all the modes work together, the railway, the bicycle, the walking, with the road, with new use, and a different vision of what can be the transportation system with a global vision about mobility. So I think we have great opportunities of imagining new coordinated combined solutions.
Great. And last word to you, Olivier.
I think the key is funding, how to fund the transition. The beauty of it is, as I said, there is a public sector that is in demand. Let's not waste this opportunity. And there is a private sector that is also looking for credible ways to compensate for its environmental footprint. If we connect the two, then I think we'll be able to find a way to fund the transition.
Yeah, and I think one of the big terms we're going to hear a lot about in the next few years is nature markets, which is a lot about that financing. Okay, well, thank you to this panel for a really good conversation. I'm going to hand over now to our final keynote, which is from Emmanuel Vauban, who's chairman of the French Energy Regulatory Commission. Then I think Grenola's going to wrap up and we'll have a lovely cocktail lunch. So thank you again for the panel, and I'd like to invite Emmanuel to the stage.
Hi, everybody. Thanks a lot for this kind invitation to speak about infrastructure in energy and circular economy. I will start by telling you where I speak from. So I'm French, as you can hear. I'm the current chairman of the Energy Regulation Authority, and we have three jobs. First one is to survey the markets, wholesale and retail market of electricity and gas, make sure that transactions are regular and there is no manipulation on the market, and make sure that the use of the interventional tools on the market, on the retail market in France, are properly used. Second job is to ensure the funding and the pricing of the grids. So that makes a nice transition with the conclusion of the previous panel about it's all about the funding. So we ensure the funding of electricity grid, transport and distribution, and gas grid, transport and distribution. And the funding is not done by us, obviously. It's paid by the final consumer. So we are deciding the prices. We are deciding the level of OPEX and CAPEX, making sure that we have the most efficient and useful grids in the country. And then we operate the bids for renewables for the French government. So we operate the offshore bids for, wind farms, but also solar and also biogas. These are our jobs. We are part of a system which is trying to cope with three different objectives on an energy policy, and these objectives are difficult to conciliate. So the first one is obviously ecological transition and sustainability, fighting against climate change. The second is affordability. No energy policy can rule out affordability topics. That's true for households and that's true for companies. Competitivity on the French market, on the European market. And the third one is a relatively new, or at least it was lower before the crisis. It is sovereignty and security of supply. And for the last 2 years, sovereignty and security of supply has been the first objective of any energetical policy in France and in Europe. These three objectives don't mix properly together. When you are desperate for energy, because you need security of supply, you are less interested in sustainability. You are taking any energy you can get. When you are coping with the crisis of supply, prices are rising. So you get your supply, but you get it at any cost, which means at an expensive cost. So, but these are this is the world into which we are working. When I look at the topic circular economy and infrastructures, I thought it was more about production, but more than about production than about the grids. But actually, the two are interlinked, so I will try to discuss this in front of you. In electricity, of course, circular economy is all about the growth of renewables, because basically solar, wind is a circular economy or a circular-based technology. We all have a very big objective about growing in renewables in France and in Europe. In France, we are more or less around 20% of the mix. At a European level, our objective is getting around 40%. Of course, in France, we have the nuclear topic. So I'm not sure I want to discuss right away if nuclear is a circular economy topic, yes or not. It's part of the mix anyway. It is circular in a way. We recycle a lot. And then there is the question of the ultimate waste. But what is sure is in France, we are past the debate about do we like more renewable or do we like more nuclear. We like more both. We absolutely need more both. We need more electricity, roughly 50% more electricity than the current use, as soon as we can have it. So more electricity means more renewable and more nuclear. If you say more renewable, you say more grids. So grids are going to be a key lever to support energy transition, circular economy applied to energy, because the more you have renewable, the more you have intermittent energy, energy which is producing whenever you have wind or sun. So the more the grids are going to be critical. The level of assets in electricity grids is around 80 billion euros in the French providers right now, RTE and Enedis. It is currently rising by between 5, whatever. I know it's a lot of money, 80 billion. So it's currently rising by 6 billion a year. It's going to rise by 9 billion a year over the next 10 years at least. So we need a huge investment in grids. This is going to be interesting for you as investors, of course. How much of this investment is going to be part of a circular economy? Not that much right now, because the investment in itself is not completely recyclable. But there is, for instance, an interesting move from RTE, which said a few days ago that it's going to recycle aluminium. So it's going to try to get aluminium from old infrastructure and get it back into its new projects. So even in grids, we are going to see recycling. As far as circular economy is concerned in the electric sector, I would say that the most circular thing within it is the electricity you don't use. Because, in circular economy, the first question you ask is the new material you don't use. So in energy, sobriety, efficiency leads you to the electricity you don't use. In the electrical system, it means we have to develop storage, and we have to develop what we call effacement in French, which I think is translated by cutoff, but I'm not too sure. So, meaning the moment when you accept that you're not using electricity because the system is so tense that you need to delay the usage, or you need to curb the climb on the electricity demand. This is going to be funded more and more at a more and more important price, at a higher and higher price, because this is going to make the difference. And I will give you only one example, which I think is very interesting. It's about electrical vehicles. We do have to develop vehicle-to-grid and grid-to-vehicle systems, because you are discussing mobility right now. If everybody comes home at 6 p.m. and plug his or her electric car and ask the system and the grid to provide electricity at this particular hour at the same time, we are going to need to double the investments in the grids, and we are not prepared to pay for it. If we don't want this, we have to pilot. We have to get the electricity in the cars during the night, and we have to be able to use the car as battery, using the power you have in the car to get power to the system. So this is only an example. I think I am way out of my time, so I just have a few comments on gas. On gas, it's completely different. Because on gas, we have a very big scissor effect because the consumption is going to go down, even if we are going to get biogas, which is, of course, a very interesting circular economy byproduct. So we are going to have more and more green gas, essentially biogas. We are going to have less and less gas consumption anyway, and we are going to have more or less the same network. Because if you use 50 or if you use 100, you still need the same network to get your 50 units of gas to your house or to your company. So there is no scale effect in the decrease of the gas infrastructure. We produced recently a study at Creux, which says by 2050, we think we will be able to decommission something around 10 to 12% of the gas network, transport and distribution, based on an assumption of consumption which will be more or less 50% of what we consume right now. So you decrease consumption, you divide it by 2, but you are able to decommission 12% of the network because you need the network. You need the network for transit from France to other countries. You need the network for distribution. So we are going to have to find a way to share the price of the network over a smaller consumption, smaller number of consumers, and smaller volume of consumption. So this is going to be a tough one for the regulation of the gas network. We have solutions, and we are discussing it with the gas providers right now. And then, of course, there is a question of the new technologies, hydrogen. Are we going to be able to convert part of the network into hydrogen? Is the model mature? The answer is no. Is it going to be in the next few years? I hope. Who is going to pay for hydrogen networks? That's an interesting question. So my message is very different perspectives on the electricity network and on the gas network. I will end by a comment on the local part, because it was a part of the last panel, and I think it's really relevant for energy also. When you discuss circular economy and infrastructures, you see it by silos. So you see circular economy in waste management, circular economy in transportation infrastructure, circular economy in energy infrastructures. At least waste and energy are going to be more and more connected over the time because of methanization of waste. We have potential. Energy is going to be connected to any kind of other topic of infrastructure because of fatal heat, because we have to get the reuse of fatal heat more and more. And so we need to get an overview on siloed energy topics and siloed energy and other topics at local level. At one point, we will need local authorities to be able to have a clear view of risk and opportunities of all infrastructures topic and how they match one the other. The politics on these topics right now are a bit siloed because, waste is paid in a certain way and investment is managed in a certain way. Energy is completely different. Sometimes state intervenes in both policies, but not the same part of state. So the call to have a closer look at local level to see how we can optimize, mutualize, how we can leap from one policy support to another is going to be needed at one point. So I think you can be part of this change, bringing connections that maybe public, decision makers are not going to bring by themselves. So I think this discussion is going to be there for a while. Thanks very much.
No sabotage. Well, it's time to wrap up and to thank everybody. And first of all, I would like to thank Methuen and Altermine, which is an amazing firm who's been actually instrumental in organizing those workshops, podcasts, and event, putting together the right people, the right academic experts with major actors from the market. It was, amazing. As a conclusion, I think we all now agree that we are facing the boundaries of our planet. We understand that we would need 1.6 Earth by 2060 if we want to keep the current standards for our planet. And so basically, why work on this subject on infrastructure? Well, basically because we are all together at the very earth of our society. We are the building blocks of our society, and all together we have a collective responsibility. So we need to act now. The good thing is that regulation is kicking on, and as we have seen, it started from a niche perspective back in 2009, being really focused on waste management, and then came up much more as an awakening phase back in 2015, thanks to Janice Potoknik, where basically we started thinking more mainstream, understanding that it was also an issue of resource scarcity, but also having a view on how to change things, eco-design from the very conception design of things. And so I'm glad to see that it's taking the stage as a mainstream objective within EU Commission. It's part of the pillars of the taxonomy, which is great. But collectively, as investors, asset managers, advisors, bankers, we have a responsibility. We need to make sure we are going to channel the funds which we are putting in the reality of our economy into the right projects. I understand from what was said that it's quite important to foster innovation, collaboration, end up with silos, because at the end of the day, policymakers are effectively game changers, but we are those which are going to put together the means to achieve this transition, and we have a collective responsibility towards future generations. A good thing is I understand that they are the whole new, younger generation is very much purpose-driven. So now it's our responsibility to make sure we will all together achieve a sustainable future. Thank you, and we have a cocktail starting right now.